Welcome to another episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. My name is Edwin Sarmiento, and welcome for joining in. If this is the first time that you're joining in, welcome. The purpose of this show is twofold. One, if you're a technical operator specializing in SQL Server, meaning you're a SQL Server DBA, or maybe you're a sysadmin and a company gave you the responsibility to take care of SQL Server databases, or you just happen to be sitting beside a database server and nobody's taking care of it, and now you're made responsible for taking care of high availability and or disaster recovery solutions. This is for you. I share tips and tricks, lessons, insights, best practices. I don't want to say best practices because primarily best practices are meant for vendors. Typically, right, when you hear the term best practices, they come from the vendor. Let's say Microsoft. They tested a lot of these possibilities, and then they kind of like, I don't want to say push it to you, but rather they would make those recommendations based on the testing they've done, not realizing, of course, we don't have the budget of Microsoft. We don't have the engineering resources of Microsoft. We don't have any of those, so I'm kind of a little bit biased when it comes to best practices, but I'm going to share them with you so that you can have a way of evaluating whether or not the best practice is applicable to you and come up with your own best practices. And I do focus on high availability and disaster recovery of SQL Server databases. Although most of the time I focus on always-on availability groups because that has become Microsoft's flagship high availability and or disaster recovery solution for SQL Server databases, and they try to push it to you even though you don't really need it. And of course, this is twofold. One is for technical operators, the other is for decision makers, whether you're a CIO or a CTO or you manage a team of tech professionals and you want to evaluate a high availability and or disaster recovery solution for your SQL Server databases, or maybe you already have it in production but your team is not ready for it. I also share some of the challenges that decision makers face when it comes to working with high availability and or disaster recovery solutions. Now, time flies really fast. I mean, we're we're almost a few weeks away from 2026, and normally with let's say end of the year, typically organizations implement what is known as, let me put it my slide there, change trees. Okay, typically, especially in North America, they would start from the United States Thanksgiving, so last week of November up until the first week of December. In some organizations, they just maximize the time that they have during the holiday seasons, a couple of weeks before Christmas and a week after the New Year. So what is change trees? Before we talk about the topic of today's conversation, this will be the emphasis or the theme for the whole month, mainly because, again, a lot of organizations are implementing what is known as change trees. So what is change trees? Change trees is the I don't want to say policy, but the practice of freezing or withholding or not allowing any changes to production other than what is considered to be emergency. The rationale behind that is during the holiday seasons, again, I'm looking at it from the point of view of North America, where holidays would normally start between the Thanksgiving season, which is the last week of November, up until like the first week of the new year. There are major economic activities, I would say. So Thanksgiving, you got like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and then for Christmas, you got like Christmas shopping. And if the company is focusing on or focuses on retail, for instance, or anything that has something to do with selling stuff online, you want to make sure that the system is stable enough so that you can keep the flow of sales through your online systems going without, and I say without causing much of a disruption. The last thing you want is for you to have a massive year-end sale and all of a sudden your entire infrastructure wouldn't work the way you want it to. So you're losing a ton of potential sales there. So that's a whole idea of change freeze. When I used to work for a data center engineer, when I used to work as a data, not for, when I used to work as a data center engineer, we did this every year. End of the year change freeze. We can't do anything. We can't even touch the system. Well, we can monitor it, of course, and react based on what our monitoring tool will tell us. Okay, but we cannot do anything, or we cannot make any changes to the entire infrastructure, to the production environment, unless, of course, it is a critical or an emergency change. We'll talk about that later. But this is also the time when either there's massive amounts of economic activity happening within the business, but it's also the time when there's not a lot of people on staff because it's the holidays. So what else would you do? I'll take some week off, I'll take some days off. And so the topic, and like I said, we will focus our entire month in conversations throughout the month on the topic of change freeze. But this week's topic revolves around the hidden HADR risks during change freeze. Okay, the hidden HADR risk, and I kind of gave a little bit of an idea behind why companies do change freeze during this time of the year. Again, economic activity, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Thanksgiving, or not Thanksgiving, Christmas shopping. So if you're in retail or if you're selling stuff online, then this is the busiest time of the year. You don't want to be introducing more risks. And you want to make sure that the platform that is serving your e-commerce site, your online website, is as stable, as reliable, as highly available as you possibly can. Again, the last thing you want is to risk taking the entire infrastructure offline while people are buying stuff from your website. That's a huge risk. And at the same time, because this is the end of the year, a lot of people in the office, they would file for vacation, they would go on vacation, Christmas, New Year, educational institutions would close their doors. And so technically, there's a little bit of a mix of too stressed out because there's so many things happening, while at the same time, a little bit laid back. Okay, but because of this combination, there are a lot of hidden risks during the change freeze period. Grab your pen and paper, take notes. Let's get on with the first risk. This is something that I've seen in environments where every year they have a fixed date when change freeze happens. And so what they do is they rush changes. Meaning if there's a request for change or an RFC, or a code deployment, or modifications to the environment, they want to push that before deadline. And so what ends up happening is the very nature of the change being rushed. Some people don't even think of what kind of change that they need to do or what kind of mitigation that they need to do in order to prevent additional issues from happening. They don't treat it like a normal change because they are tight on a schedule. Okay, this is where increased risk happens. I'll give you an example. Development of a new feature in an app is slated towards end of the year, but they didn't factor in change freeze schedule. So let's say change freeze is supposed to happen second week of December, but then the rollout should be last week of December. they're now scrambling to make sure that the code changes get implemented before the change freeze. And so developers will probably not have enough time, or if they do, they probably work long hours, but they won't have enough time to test, to validate, to tweak, to improve on the code changes, because they have to push it to production before change freeze. And so this all increases the risk. Why? Because they're not putting in the proper time, effort, and resources to properly test the code changes. Okay, with databases, for instance, new products are being sold. Again, this is the time of the year when a lot of economic activity is happening, and so maybe a company is introducing new products. And so within the database, you would introduce new products, you would insert new records into the database, make some modifications to the database schema to include these new products. But because you have to push those database changes before change freeze, you kind of rush it. Imagine having to deal with a massively large database and then you make some changes to the schema. Oh, and by the way, you have something like an always-on availability groups in the mix. So now you're changing the database schema, which would lock the table, which would then affect transaction log records getting replicated over the secondary, and so on and so forth. And because you're rushing the changes to be pushed to production, you're introducing additional risks. You're increasing the risk. And this is one of those hidden dangers, because everybody wants to meet the deadline. And so because they want to meet the deadline of not pushing changes to production after change freeze already started, they would rush those changes and scramble when things don't go as planned. Okay, so that's one of the risks. Rushed changes because they want to meet the deadline. The second one is skeleton crew. I don't really know why people call it skeleton crew. I didn't have time to do a quick research on why they call it skeleton crew, but it is called skeleton crew. So what is this thing? It is, again, during change freeze, a lot of people go on vacation. In my case, when I used to work as a full-time employee, what I'll do is I will batch all of my vacation days. I will not take any vacation day throughout the year, and because where I come from, the Philippines, Christmas and the New Year is a very special holiday for us. So what I'll do is I'll batch my vacation days, and because in Canada we have Christmas and Boxing Day and then New Year, so that's 3 vacation days covered by what is called statutory holidays. I only have to fill in like a couple of days in between those dates, and I can have a week and a half worth of vacation with only 4 days. Because again, Christmas, Boxing Day, and then Saturday and Sunday, and then New Year. Which, if I batch my vacation days, I would maximize the number of times I'm not working throughout the year by pushing all of my vacation days through Christmas and New Year. And because of that, and that's just me, I'm pretty sure that's not just me. I mean, there are other people who would think that way. Oh, we got change freeze. We got nothing else to do. There's not a lot of things happening during normal business hours. I'm going to go on vacation. Okay? And because this is the case, again, most people in North America, or most people who celebrate the Christmas and New Year celebration, they would go on vacation during this season, change freeze season, or change freeze period. And so you have what is called a skeleton crew, where you only have limited amount of people, enough number of people to support the entire business. And when I mean entire business, from finance, accounting, sometimes HR is not even there because who needs HR, but specifically with IT, because you have very few people working during this time of the year? Well, imagine you have a combination of not a lot of people in the office and high economic activity during the season with the Christmas shopping. Imagine the combination of those two. You now have a potential perfect storm. Of course, why? Again, if your business is selling stuff online and you're offering massive discounts or sales, you now have an increase in the workload on your entire e-commerce site. So your entire infrastructure will be affected. Your databases, your web servers, your application servers, your network. So there will be an increase in the workload. And then you're telling me there's not enough people on staff. I kind of, again, I kind of question the idea behind you're doing a lot of these economic activity and there's not enough people on staff. Okay. And part of that is because it's been a part of the company culture where, okay, during this time of the year, people, well, again, you can't blame people for taking vacations during this time of the year because, again, they deserve it. That's one. And number two, they also think, oh, it's change freeze. Nothing is going to happen. So if I'm working in, let's say if I'm working in finance, I'm going on vacation. I'll let the salespeople and the IT people be in the office throughout my vacation. Okay. And so with that in mind, even the tech people would think of it that way. Oh, I'm supporting a development environment. I'm not going to be doing much during change freeze. Although development, of course, is not excluded during change freeze. You can do anything you want to do with development environment. Change freeze only applies to production environment, especially critical environment. But because you have like skeleton crew, there's not enough people. So imagine, how do you prepare for an emergency situation where your high availability solutions become unavailable? Even worse is if the most junior guy is left as part of the skeleton crew and the most senior guy went on vacation and is not coming back until after the new year. Sucks for the junior person. Okay? So that's one of the risks. Okay? Because of the combination of high economic activity and very few people on staff, skeleton crew, you could potentially end up in a situation where your HA solutions would need all the support it needs because there's so much workload, there's so much happening in the system, and people need skilled people. Okay, skilled and available people. Skilled people and available people need to be ready in case something goes wrong. Okay, there was a case a couple of years ago. My very first on-call assignments during Christmas, while the entire family is having Christmas dinner, I was on my laptop dealing with pages. There are pages after pages coming in. And I do remember it vividly because that's the very reason I told myself I'm never going to ever do this again. 10:30 p.m., 24th of December, while everybody else is getting ready to have dinner, Christmas Eve dinner, I'm on my laptop addressing pages after pages. So I'm done with this. I'm never ever going to do this again. And so imagine that you got to have somebody, hopefully they've committed to be there and not, like in my case, having Christmas dinner while responding to pages, meaning they're full on 100% attentive and they've given their time, their resources to be there, which means they're probably not taking vacation days during Christmas, or they may also be working during the Christmas, the New Year holidays. So again, that's one of the risks. The third one is emergency change confusion. What is emergency change confusion? Think of it this way. You communicated to the entire company. And mind you, this is not just the IT department. This is the entire company. We got change freeze. Okay? And this is important because if it's just the IT department, then the entire company doesn't really care. But you're telling the entire company we have change freeze. We're communicating that we have change freeze, meaning if the salespeople wanted a specific feature added on the app, they know they can't make that request until after change freeze, or in some cases before change freeze, hence risk number one, the rushing of changes happen. Okay. But because you've communicated this to the entire company, okay, you got rush changes, you got skeleton crew, now you have confusion as to what constitutes allowed versus not allowed. This is what I call exceptions, meaning just because you're told you cannot make changes to production or you cannot push any change to production doesn't mean you're not supposed to do anything during change freeze. Okay? Big misconception. And that's also one of the reasons why you have to really communicate what is considered as an emergency. One example that I could think of when I was still working as a data center engineer was during change freeze, we cannot really make changes to the production system. Unfortunately, and of course, back then I was working throughout the week because I was in Asia and we only had like Christmas, New Year. And during the change freeze season, there was a security hotfix that Microsoft released, kind of like a 0-day threat. And we needed to implement it in production. Of course, we have to test it in UAT staging and production. And what ended up happening was, of course, we got the approval. So that's an example. Okay, that's an example. It's a critical patch. It's a security patch that we need to implement immediately. We cannot wait until the change freeze happens because we'll be exposed. So that's an example of it. It's not an emergency. I mean, from the point of view of business operations, it's not an emergency, but the very nature of the patch and the very nature of the issue that is being addressed with the patch constitutes an emergency. So that is allowed. Okay. The other thing is you got your e-commerce site, you got the entire infrastructure up and running, customers are buying stuff online, and all of a sudden you got performance issues. Now that's an emergency because the performance issue is causing all of these user transactions, the sales that are coming in, to take much longer. And you know how it is. We humans, we have been conditioned that Amazon Prime and fast is the standard. So now if you cannot buy stuff online, you move on and find another website that sells the exact same product as what you're trying to buy. And so that constitutes an emergency, meaning if you start to see performance issues while change freeze as transactions are happening, you have got to make an emergency request for change, find the issue of the performance problem, fix it, and then document it, because now we have to backtrack that onto UAT and staging. Okay, but that's an emergency change. Part of the confusion there is, again, because if, let's say, you just say change freeze, the communication and the expectation is I'm not supposed to be doing anything. And so this creates this confusion when, again, if you're the only person left there because of skeleton crew and you encountered an alert from your monitoring tool saying, oh, we have 30% free space on disk. That's an emergency change when you're looking at your transaction log files on that disk or your database files on that disk. When that disk gets filled, your databases become offline. Okay, so again, that's kind of like the confusion there. You have to communicate properly when an emergency or when a critical change needs to happen. You bypass change freeze and make that as an exception. Okay, so we've looked at rush changes as a risk. We've looked at skeleton crew as a risk. We've looked at emergency change confusion as a risk. Normally I would stop at 3, but there's another one. 4th is clearing backlog. What do I mean by clearing backlog? This is something that I've heard from a lot of my friends working in tech, and I didn't realize this is also something that a lot of companies and a lot of organizations do. Because it's change freeze, and I did say that this is communicated across the board, not just IT. It is communicated across the board. You got skeleton crew. You got people going on vacation. So it's pretty quiet in the office, aside from the economic activity happening online. Like the sales are just coming online. If everything is done properly, everything is configured, set up properly, and you've allowed for scale, then those transactions, the sales are just coming in, and as an IT professional, you just sit down and do nothing. Then we get bored. No, not really. But then, because there's not a lot of people in the office, this is the perfect opportunity to pick up on a lot of the projects that were not done, because users will be saying, oh, you can't do this because we're using the system. Okay, so a lot of these changes to mainly production, a lot of the changes that are supposed to happen throughout the year got pushed back because a user is using the system, or there is no maintenance window allowed because the business unit overlaps with other business units. And so this, because it's quiet in the office, is the perfect opportunity to pick up on a lot of the backlog. It's also interesting that there's kind of a disconnect between the idea behind change freeze and implementing projects during change freeze, if you get what I mean. One of my friends who worked as a network engineer and also IT in general said, change freeze, we are now going to push a new SIP trunk line. A telephone, a voice over IP SIP, I forgot what it means. Voice over IP system, because nobody's in the office now, and so we can go ahead and implement it. Sure. Okay. Another one was saying, oh, this is the perfect time for us to migrate all of our on-premises email system to Azure. Sure, because everybody's on vacation. But you also have to think of those projects that you plan to implement during change freeze, because there's not a lot of people in the office. You also have to think about how they are going to impact the production system that you're not supposed to be touching. Okay, because again, the rationale behind that is, oh, this is maybe SharePoint, it's internal, it's not going to affect our production system, not realizing that your production system is integrated with these things that you're trying to change. Okay, so again, this is another risk. You're trying to clear your project backlog throughout the year because it's quiet in the office, there's not a lot of people, so you can do and implement those projects fast, not having to worry about people and staff trying to pull you in all different directions because they need your help. Okay, again, this is a risk because you have to make sure that whatever you're doing, because that's still considered production, the phone system, the SharePoint, even your email servers. What if your production e-commerce site is integrated with your email system, that it sends out email to your customers after buying the product? So you have to be clear that whatever it is you're implementing is not directly affecting the production system that you're not supposed to be touching at all. Okay? So those are risks, though. 4 risks that show up. They're hidden because, again, we kind of have this weird combination of high economic activity versus not enough people on staff during the holidays, and so we implement this change freeze, not realizing that other people also have other ideas with change freeze. And again, if you're doing change freeze during this time of the year, be aware of these risks. Plan for them. Make sure that you are prepared for any kind of emergency. And of course, make sure that your high availability solutions are kept highly available. Meaning you have to have capable and available people on call 24/7. Make sure that they're available, and not just available, but also capable. Okay, you don't want to be again scrambling during change freeze when your production system is down and nobody's available to fix it. That is about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. And again, the entire month's emphasis, or kind of like the theme, it's all about change freeze. Specifically how change freeze affect your operations, your day-to-day technical operations, specifically around high availability and or disaster recovery solutions for your SQL Server databases, or high availability and disaster recovery solutions in general. Okay, tune in again next week for another topic for the Practical SQL Server HA show. And if you need any help, and this is actually the perfect time because it's change freeze, to go through what I call strategic planning for next year, because there's not a lot of people in the office. Use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session. I call it a strategy session because we're going to be doing two things. One, we're going to get clear on what your challenges are. Maybe you're coming up with a strategic plan on how to implement your HADR solution. Maybe you want to do a quick evaluation of your HADR infrastructure. So that's the first part. The second part is, of course, an action plan on what to do next. Okay, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session. This, by the way, would lead you to my calendar page where you can pick and choose a time that works for you. Okay, use that link, schedule a strategy session, and be happy to help in any way I can. All right, that is about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll see you again next time.